To dance is to reach for a word that doesn't exist. To sing the heart song of 1,000 generations. To feel the meaning of a moment in time. That quote was said by Beth Jones. Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and today I'm going to give my introductory speech on dance and the progression of dance throughout the years. I grew up dancing. I was a dancer from when I was 5 years old to when I was 10 years old, and I loved it. I loved every moment of it. It was a great way to express how I felt and how to escape from kind of reality. So I was actually in a club the other day, and I looked around. I'm dancing with my friends. I look around, and I thought to myself, how did we get to this point in time with dancing? How did all these people come together and say, this is the dance move we are going to do, this is how we're going to express ourselves? And how did we get from this point? I mean, my grandmother never would dance like I do, and I'm sure her grandmother would never dance the way that she did. So what changed? What influences different dance moves? And you kind of have to look back to, where did it all start? Now, that's hard to do because dance is an action. Can't really pinpoint an action when they didn't have the technology to do so. But archaeologists believe that early paintings, cave paintings, tomb paintings, and pyramids reflect that that's when they started to dance. And it could be that before that people were dancing, but there was no evidence of it. So 3,000 years ago, they have Indian and Egyptian paintings of people dancing. Now, why did we start to dance? That's the question. They believe, archaeologists being, not myself, they believe that there's two reasons. One being, it's a method of healing. And I'm not talking healing in the sense of you dance and then you feel better. Talking healing in the sense of it was a precursor to a transic state in healing. And what that means is they would dance to combine the mind and the body together as one. And then they would go on to the healing process. Because if you didn't have the mind and the body together in this transic state, this trance-like state, then you weren't able to heal yourself. So there's that. But also, they believe the second was a method of expression, which is what we still commonly use it for today. They used it to perform their telling of myths, to show the feelings that they had for the opposite sex, or their family, or their friends. And since the production of a written language really wasn't into effect until later on, much later on, dance was one of the ways that they could tell a story down from generation to generation. And you can use words to tell a story, but it's not going to be as easily remembered as one that has an action behind it. Now, from that point to where we use dance as plays and storytelling, it evolved into ballroom dancing, and when these kingdoms would have elaborate parties, they would all dance the waltz and spin around, and very elegant instrumental music. That still took into play in the early 1900s too. It obviously wasn't as slow. We started to pick up our pace with music a little bit, but everything was very instrumental. In the early 1900s, they had the foxtrot, which was 1912, the whirlwind waltz, and then in 1915 you had the Cincinnati two-step and walking the dog, and these were all very instrumental dance moves. In 1917, jazz dance came out, and this was a breakthrough in music and dance where jazz became very dominant, and it was a very spicy instrumental groove. You had African American artists coming out, and the voice of just soul, basically. And you had a dance move that came out in 1922, very popular, and reflected how these people felt at the time. It's called the Charleston. Now, the Charleston was reflected on how tightly gripped the government had. These people, there's prohibition going on at the time. These people weren't able to do what they wanted to do, so this dance move reflected their rebellion towards the government and telling them that they can't do this or that. And it was a great way to show that. Later on, the 1930s and 1940s, you still have that jazz kind of pop beat going on, and then you see the early beginnings of rock and roll. Rock and roll started with Elvis Presley, and a lot of African American singers started the jazz. Well, jazz inspired rock and roll, and so rock and roll started becoming popular. And then in the 60s, a very popular rock band, the Beatles, started a whole revolution with these rock stars. And it wasn't until 1965 that people really got on board with this whole rock star boy band group thing. You had the dance moves like the mashed potato, the locomotion, very like boppy, but a little more edgy. You had a lot of people doing drugs, so many of the songs were reflected more peacefully, and the dance moves were more laid back and very calm. 70s, you had an explosion of electronic and techno type music, very computerized and still fun. So you had moves like the disco, you had moves like the Texas two-step, the hustle, the crip walk, and then that in turn, the disco, sparked kind of a hip-hop, pop kind of breakthrough. And so in the 80s, you saw moves like the moonwalk by Michael Jackson, you saw breakdancing, which was very popular, the robot, the worm, and disco was a electronic type dance, so the moves were very rigid and done almost robot-like. So when Robot comes out in the 1980s, it was a smooth transition into. Then in the 90s, we had the Macarena and the Bump and Grind, which reflected very different rap artists that came out. Biggie was very big back then. All his music had a certain beat to it, and it was a hippie, and when I say hippie, I mean like move your hips kind of music. Now, in the 2000s, we see the same type of thing, just a little bit more of a variety. We have the 1-2 step, Harlem Shake, Crumping, Superman, and everything. And it's not just one type of dance moves. These are just the popular ones. I feel like everything has come together combined. People dance the way they want to dance, whether it be the bop and jive or hand jive or the disco. And it's amazing to me that everybody has their own way of doing so. And I'm glad that in all the years that we've progressed from this point, we'll only progress farther into our expression of how we feel and life. And I suggest for anyone who doesn't dance to go out and just dance like no one's, like that quote says, dance like no one's watching, laugh like no one's listening, and just live your life, because dance is the best expression of how you feel inside. And today I hope you learned a little something about the progression of dance and how extreme it's come from, how people may think it is come from an extreme point to another, but it kind of does transgress into each other throughout the decades. So have a good one.